Part 1. Eleanor Chase built her empire on a simple principle: no problem sits long enough to win. It wasn't written on the walls of Chase Prestige Motors. It wasn't printed in employee manuals or displayed inside conference rooms. It existed somewhere deeper, woven into the culture she had spent 17 years creating. Problems were identified. Problems were isolated. Problems were solved. Quickly, efficiently, permanently. That philosophy had helped her expand from a single showroom into a 12-location luxury automotive empire spread across 4 states. It had earned her a reputation that made competitors nervous and investors confident. It had never failed her, until a Thursday morning in Denver. The showroom on Cherry Creek Boulevard was not designed to make people comfortable. It was designed to make people want things. Italian marble stretched across the floor in flawless gray slabs. Lighting consultants flown in from Milan had spent weeks calibrating every fixture, so each vehicle appeared sculpted rather than displayed. The climate control systems maintained temperature variations within a single degree year-round. 12 cars occupied the showroom floor, each positioned with mathematical precision, each angled so that from almost any location in the building, at least one seemed to be staring back at you. Nothing inside the building existed by accident. Eleanor preferred it that way. She arrived every morning at 6:45, long before employees, long before customers, long before the building filled with conversations and transactions and negotiations. She liked the silence, the quiet walk through the showroom before the day began. For 17 years, that walk had told her everything she needed to know. If something was wrong, she sensed it before she could explain why. The morning everything changed, she skipped the walk entirely. Outside, Denver sat under a pale winter sky. The temperature hovered at 31 degrees Fahrenheit. Eleanor entered through a private access door and headed directly toward the rear garage where her Bugatti Chiron Super Sport waited. The car had arrived 7 months earlier, after a 14-month production wait. It was one of the most precisely engineered machines ever built, a rolling monument to mechanical perfection. Eleanor didn't drive it often. That wasn't the point. She owned it for the same reason she owned marble floors, custom lighting, and a collection of rare watches. Precision carried to its absolute limit became something more than function. It became a statement. She pressed her hand against the driver's door. Nothing happened. No unlock sequence, no electronic hum, no response. She frowned slightly and tried again. Still nothing. The car sat completely lifeless beneath the garage lights. Eleanor pulled out her phone and opened the Bugatti Connect application. Remote start. 4 seconds passed. Then an error message appeared. One she had never seen before. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Not anxious. Eleanor Chase didn't do anxiety. What she felt was different. Recognition. The realization that her normal tools might not work on this particular problem. By 8 o'clock that morning, she had already called her head of service operations, her regional Bugatti contact in Chicago, and an independent diagnostic specialist who had once solved a particularly difficult issue involving a Koenigsegg. By noon, all 3 delivered the same answer. Every system appeared normal. Battery voltage normal. Engine management system normal. Communications network normal. No fault codes. No obvious failures. The car was, according to every available metric, perfectly healthy. It simply refused to start. On the second day, Hunter Blake arrived. Hunter was famous in the small world occupied by owners of hypercars and ultra-rare performance machines. His company, Auto Elite International, handled problems most technicians never encountered. He had repaired vehicles on private islands, diagnosed electrical failures aboard superyachts, been flown across continents to service cars worth tens of millions of dollars. He arrived with 4 technicians, specialized diagnostic equipment, and the confidence of a man accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. He shook Eleanor's hand and assured her they would have answers within 48 hours. Eleanor believed him, at least initially. During the first 2 days, she observed the team from a distance. Their process impressed her. They were disciplined, organized, methodical. Hunter managed the operation with the efficiency of a military commander. No wasted motion, no unnecessary discussion, no confusion. Everything suggested competence. By the fourth day, they had produced a 30-slide technical presentation and exactly 0 solutions. The Odyssey diagnostic platform completed full system interrogations twice. The CAN bus architecture had been analyzed from end to end. Software updates were installed. Remote consultations with Bugatti engineers in France were conducted. Nothing changed. The car remained dead. On day 5, Hunter authorized replacement of the primary ECU. $47,000 later, the Bugatti still refused to start. Eleanor continued attending briefings. She sat quietly at the conference table, asked precise questions, received precise answers, said very little beyond what was necessary. Her questions never wandered. She wasn't fishing for possibilities. She was mapping the boundaries of what people actually knew. By day 7, the atmosphere inside the service garage had changed. The problem was no longer just technical. It was becoming personal. Logan Pierce, the youngest member of Hunter's team, suggested something unusual during an afternoon briefing. He proposed the possibility of an undocumented ground path somewhere inside the vehicle's electrical architecture. His reasoning was simple. Every documented system had been examined. Every conventional diagnostic procedure had failed. Perhaps the fault existed somewhere outside the official schematic entirely. Hunter dismissed the idea within 90 seconds. The official documentation showed complete ground coverage. All measurements confirmed integrity. Introducing undocumented variables would only scatter the investigation. Logan said nothing further, but he made a note in his file, a note that would eventually matter more than anyone realized. By day 8, the whiteboard inside the garage resembled a battlefield map. Colored markers branched across the surface in every direction. Hypotheses, test results, elimination paths, dead ends. Hunter stood before it every morning. Confident posture, less confident eyes. On the morning of day 9, he met Eleanor inside the conference room. The next phase of the investigation would require partial removal of the vehicle's primary circuit architecture. 5 to 7 additional days. Another $120,000. Hunter finished his presentation. Eleanor listened without interruption. Then she closed the proposal folder and placed both hands on top of it. "I'll give you 24 hours, she said calmly. Hunter opened his mouth. "That's not a negotiation." Eleanor stood, picked up her coffee, and walked out. 24 hours. No more. At exactly 11:47 that same morning, a faded blue Ford F-150 rolled through the service gate. It looked entirely out of place among the exotic machinery and polished concrete. The paint had faded unevenly from years of use. The hood was lighter than the cab. The passenger door lighter than the hood. Every panel carried its own history. Behind the wheel sat Isaac Ward, mid-40s. Canvas jacket, calloused hands. A cardboard parts box resting on the passenger seat. On the dashboard sat a folded note. At the top, written slightly larger than everything else, was his son's name. Beneath it were reminders, groceries, pickup time, ordinary things, the kind of things that mattered when your entire world revolved around a 9-year-old boy. Isaac climbed out, picked up the parts box, and headed toward the service entrance. He wasn't there for the Bugatti. He wasn't there for Eleanor Chase. He was making a routine parts delivery for the German Vehicle Service Department. The contact information on the order was outdated, but the address was correct. He walked through the service bay carrying the box under one arm. Then something caught his attention. Through a narrow gap between a vehicle lift and a shelving unit, he saw part of the Bugatti, only the rear quarter panel, part of the diffuser, a section of the taillight, nothing more. Yet his stride changed immediately. Not dramatically. Just enough. The subtle shift that happens when someone hears their own name unexpectedly spoken in a crowded room. Isaac kept walking, signed the delivery paperwork, finished the transaction, then looked back toward the service bay. The Bugatti remained partially visible beneath a protective cover. Something about it held his attention, and for the first time that morning, the schedule written on the dashboard of his old pickup truck stopped being the most important thing in his day. Isaac Ward had spent most of his adult life learning to trust instincts he couldn't always explain. The best calibration engineers eventually developed them. Numbers mattered, data mattered, technical documentation mattered. But after enough years around complex machines, experience began filling gaps mathematics couldn't reach immediately. Sometimes a technician noticed a sound before an instrument measured it. Sometimes a vibration carried information that never appeared on a screen. Sometimes an entire vehicle felt wrong despite every diagnostic system insisting otherwise. Those instincts had once made Isaac extraordinarily valuable. Now they mostly helped him repair delivery vans and identify faulty alternators before they stranded local customers. Yet the feeling returned the moment he saw the rear quarter panel of the Bugatti. He finished the delivery paperwork anyway. Professional habits remained professional habits. The service manager signed the invoice. Isaac collected the confirmation copy. The transaction concluded. Normal. Simple. Done. Then he glanced toward the covered vehicle again. That the Chiron? He asked casually. The service manager laughed. Not because anything was funny, because everyone in the building had been discussing the Chiron for 9 straight days. Unfortunately, Isaac nodded. Problem? The manager rubbed his eyes. Depends who you ask. What does that mean? Means $500,000 and 8 days of diagnostics haven't fixed it. Isaac paused. $500,000? Close enough. The manager pointed toward the service bay. You want entertainment? Walk over there and ask someone how it's going. Isaac wasn't looking for entertainment, yet curiosity nudged him forward, not because the car was expensive, not because it was rare, because something about the situation felt familiar. The closer he moved toward the Bugatti, the more details became visible. The vehicle sat isolated beneath bright overhead lighting. Diagnostic cables stretched from multiple access points. Several laptops rested on mobile workstations nearby. Whiteboards covered with technical notes lined one wall. The entire area looked less like a service department and more like a temporary engineering command center. Hunter Blake stood near the front of the car reviewing data with 2 technicians. Isaac recognized him immediately, not personally, professionally. Hunter's reputation extended far beyond luxury dealerships. The man appeared regularly in technical publications, industry conferences, engineering forums. If a hypercar developed a mysterious fault somewhere in the world, Hunter Blake's name usually entered the conversation sooner or later. Isaac watched quietly for several moments. Nobody paid attention to him. Why would they? To everyone present, he was just a parts delivery driver wearing a faded canvas jacket, exactly the way he preferred it. Then Logan Pierce emerged from beneath the vehicle holding a diagnostic tablet. Nothing? Hunter asked. Logan shook his head. Ground integrity remains within specification. Hunter sighed. Again. Again. The younger technician hesitated. I still think we should revisit the secondary grounding possibility. Hunter's expression tightened slightly. Not angry. Just tired. Logan, I know. The schematics are complete. Probably. Hunter folded his arms. The schematics are complete. Logan nodded. Right. Yet Isaac noticed something. The younger technician agreed verbally without actually changing his mind. He recognized that look too. Engineers wore it when evidence and authority pointed in different directions. Isaac glanced toward the Bugatti again, then toward the diagnostic displays, then back at Logan. A thought surfaced. Small, quiet, persistent. He should leave, pick up groceries, get home before school ended, stay on schedule. That had been his life for years. Simpler, better, focused on what mattered. Yet he remained standing there. 30 seconds became a minute became 3. Finally Hunter noticed him. Can I help you? The question wasn't hostile, just direct. Isaac nodded toward the car. Maybe. Silence followed. Several technicians looked up. Hunter studied him briefly. Delivery jacket, work boots, parts invoice. Nothing remarkable. You work here? No. Customer? No. Then maybe is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Fair point. Isaac smiled faintly. Probably. Logan glanced between them, clearly curious. Hunter returned his attention to the tablet. Appreciate the offer, but we've got it handled. Isaac almost left. Almost. Then he asked one more question. When did it fail? Hunter looked mildly irritated. 9 days ago. Immediately? What? Did it stop running suddenly? Yes. Any precursor faults? No. Intermittent issues beforehand? No. Hunter finally lowered the tablet. Why? Isaac shrugged. Just asking. Logan was paying very close attention now. Hunter, less so. Battery voltage normal. Control systems normal. Communication normale. Ground integrity normal. He gestured toward the vehicle. Everything is normal except the part where it won't start. Several nearby technicians laughed tiredly. Isaac didn't. He kept looking at the Bugatti. What production year? Hunter frowned. Excuse me? Production year. Why? Isaac's gaze remained fixed on the vehicle. Just curious. Logan checked the file automatically. Late production cycle. Special configuration order. Isaac nodded once. Very slightly. Something clicked. Not a conclusion. Not yet. Just a memory. A distant one. The kind buried beneath years. Hunter noticed the expression. You know something? Maybe. The word appeared again. Logan smiled despite himself. Hunter didn't. Everybody keeps saying maybe. Isaac looked at the Chiron. Do you mind if I ask one more question? Hunter glanced at the clock. Then at the delivery driver. Then at the technicians waiting for direction. 1. Isaac pointed toward the engine compartment. Has anyone physically bypassed the rear secondary ground point? Complete silence. Logan blinked. Hunter stared. One technician looked confused. Another immediately opened a schematic. Rear what? Logan asked quietly. Isaac finally looked away from the vehicle. Secondary ground point. Hunter's expression hardened. There isn't one. Isaac didn't answer immediately. He simply continued studying the Bugatti. Then he spoke. There is on some of them. The service bay became very still. Logan looked back down at the production information. His eyes narrowed. Hunter stepped forward. Some of them, certain late production variants. That's not documented. Isaac nodded. I know. Silence returned. Longer this time. Hunter looked toward the whiteboard, then toward the car, then back at the delivery driver. How would you know that? For the first time since entering the building, Isaac seemed slightly uncomfortable. Not nervous, just reluctant, like someone being pulled toward a conversation he never intended to have. Because, he said carefully, I approved the calibration package for that production revision. Nobody spoke. Not Logan. Not the technicians. Not the service manager watching from across the room. Nobody. Hunter stared at him. What? Isaac exhaled slowly. I used to work in Molsheim. The silence deepened, because everyone in the room understood exactly what that meant. Bugatti's headquarters. Bugatti's engineering center. Bugatti's factory. The place where cars like the Chiron were born. Logan was the first person to recover. Wait, he looked at Isaac. Who are you? Isaac glanced toward the exit, then toward the dashboard clock visible through the service bay doors. School pickup in less than an hour. Groceries still needed. A normal life waiting outside. Nobody important, he said. Yet something told Logan Pierce that answer was completely untrue. Hunter Blake did not enjoy surprises. In his profession, surprises were usually expensive. They damaged timelines, embarrassed experts, and occasionally appeared in online forums where anonymous strangers questioned your competence for years afterward. Yet standing inside the service bay, staring at a parts delivery driver who had casually referenced an undocumented Bugatti production revision, he found himself experiencing exactly that feeling. What was your position? Hunter asked. Isaac shifted the cardboard box under one arm. Long time ago. That's not an answer. Lead calibration engineer. Silence returned immediately. Logan actually stopped typing. One technician looked up from a laptop. Another slowly lowered a diagnostic probe. Hunter stared at him. Lead calibration engineer? Isaac nodded once. For the Chiron platform? Among other things, the room became very quiet, because everyone present understood what that title meant. Calibration engineers didn't assemble cars. They didn't perform routine maintenance. They defined how vehicles behaved. Engine management. Power delivery. Thermal protection strategies. Communications between hundreds of interconnected systems. They wrote the rules every other technician followed. Hunter folded his arms. And now you deliver parts? Isaac smiled faintly. Most days. The answer somehow made the situation stranger instead of clearer. Logan stepped closer. You worked on late production Super Sport variants? Isaac nodded. Some. Including special orders? Depends on the order. Logan immediately turned toward the vehicle. His brain was already moving faster than the conversation. The chassis number. He grabbed a tablet and pulled up the production file. This one was a custom allocation build. Isaac looked at the screen from across the room. I know. Hunter narrowed his eyes. You know? I recognized the specification package. From one glance, Isaac shrugged. Certain configurations are memorable. Nobody laughed because nobody was entirely sure he was joking. At that moment, Eleanor Chase entered the service bay. She had been reviewing financial reports upstairs when David informed her that something unusual was happening. Experience had taught her that unusual developments rarely improved if ignored. She walked into the garage expecting another technical briefing. Instead, she found her hypercar specialists standing around a delivery driver. "What did I miss?" she asked. Hunter turned immediately. Potential new information. Eleanor looked at Isaac, then at the cardboard parts box, then back at Hunter. From him? Apparently. Isaac sighed quietly. The reaction was familiar. People always looked surprised when expertise arrived wearing work boots. Eleanor stepped forward. And who exactly are you? Isaac set the box down. Isaac Ward. And? Parts delivery. Logan actually laughed. He couldn't help it. Hunter didn't. Eleanor certainly didn't. I think we're past that part, she said. Isaac glanced toward the clock again. 43 minutes until school pickup. Probably. Hunter gestured toward the Bugatti. He says there may be an undocumented secondary ground point on this configuration. Eleanor looked immediately interested. Maybe, there is, Isaac corrected gently. You're certain? Yes. How? Isaac hesitated, then pointed toward the vehicle. Because I signed off on the production release. Silence. Complete silence. Eleanor stared at him for several seconds. You what? The calibration package. You approved it? Part of it. Logan was already searching archived production notes. Wait. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen. There was a late engineering amendment. Hunter stepped closer. Show me. Logan rotated the tablet. A partial production record appeared. Most of it looked routine. Then, buried deep inside supplementary documentation, sat a reference code connected to a manufacturing revision. Tiny. Easy to miss. Almost invisible. I never saw that, Hunter admitted. Nobody did. Logan looked up. Why? Isaac finally walked toward the Bugatti. Because it wasn't considered service. Relevant. Clearly it is now. Apparently. Eleanor watched him carefully. The man carried himself differently once the conversation became technical. Still calm. Still quiet. But focused. Precise. Like someone speaking a language he knew better than his own. Explain it, she said. Isaac nodded toward the rear section of the car. During late production, a small number of vehicles received an additional grounding pathway to stabilize transient voltage behavior under certain thermal conditions. Hunter frowned. Why wasn't it documented in service architecture? Because it never failed. Until now. Isaac nodded. Until now. Logan's eyes widened slightly. If that connection degraded, the control systems would see normal voltage. The network would appear healthy. Correct. Diagnostics would show nothing wrong. Correct. Logan looked toward Hunter. That matches everything. Nobody spoke for several seconds, because it matched everything perfectly. 8 days, hundreds of tests, $500,000 in diagnostics, every symptom aligned. Hunter looked back at Isaac. And you're telling me the entire fault could originate from one hidden ground path? Possibly. Possibly? Isaac smiled faintly. I like leaving room for surprises. Logan immediately laughed. Hunter did not. Eleanor found herself suppressing a smile, against her better judgment. Can you prove it? She asked. Isaac looked at the Bugatti. Then at the clock. 36 minutes. Maybe. Hunter noticed. You have somewhere to be. School pickup. School pickup? My son. Silence again. Eleanor blinked. You're about to leave? Eventually. Hunter stared at him. We're talking about a $3.9 million Bugatti. Isaac nodded. I know, the most complicated vehicle in this building. Probably. And you need to leave for school pickup? Isaac looked genuinely confused by the question. Yes. For several moments, nobody knew how to respond. Then Eleanor did something she almost never did. She adapted. How long would it take? Isaac considered. 5 minutes. To prove it? Maybe 10. Hunter looked horrified. 8 days of diagnostics. 10 minutes. Logan looked fascinated. Eleanor simply folded her arms. Then you have 10 minutes. Isaac glanced toward the Bugatti, then toward the exit, then back at the vehicle. Finally, he nodded once. Okay, and for the first time in 9 days, the investigation actually moved forward. Isaac Ward removed his canvas jacket before approaching the Bugatti. The gesture was simple, almost automatic, yet something about it changed the atmosphere inside the service bay. For the first time, he no longer looked like a delivery driver who happened to be standing near an expensive car. He looked like an engineer, not because of his clothes, because of the way he moved, calm, efficient, completely uninterested in impressing anyone. Hunter noticed immediately. So did Logan. Eleanor simply watched. Isaac walked toward the rear of the Chiron and knelt beside the engine compartment. He didn't reach for a laptop. He didn't request diagnostic reports. He didn't ask to see the whiteboard filled with 8 days of technical analysis. Instead, he studied the vehicle itself. Do you have a continuity lead? He asked. Logan handed one over immediately. Here. Isaac nodded. Thanks. Then he crawled partially beneath the rear section of the car. Several technicians exchanged confused looks. Hunter folded his arms. What exactly are you checking? A memory. A memory? Sometimes that's enough. The answer irritated Hunter slightly. Not because it was wrong. Because it sounded impossible. Logan, meanwhile, looked fascinated. He followed Isaac's movements carefully. The younger technician had already reached a conclusion. The delivery driver wasn't guessing. People didn't move like that when they were guessing. A few moments later, Isaac stopped. There. Logan leaned closer. What? Isaac pointed toward a section hidden behind a thermal shielding panel. Secondary ground junction. Hunter frowned. That's not on the service schematic. I know. How can you even see that? Isaac smiled faintly. I helped hide it. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Logan laughed. Not because the statement was funny, because it perfectly explained everything. Isaac disconnected a small access cover and exposed a grounding connection buried deep within the assembly. At first glance, it looked fine, clean, intact, undamaged. Hunter immediately noticed. That connection looks perfect, visually. Yes, Isaac nodded. That's the problem. He connected the continuity lead, waited, adjusted pressure slightly, then watched the reading fluctuate. Tiny variations, almost invisible, yet enough, more than enough. Logan saw it instantly. No way. Isaac looked up. Yep. That's it. Looks like it. Hunter stepped forward. Explain. Isaac pointed toward the reading. The connection isn't failing. Then why does the signal change? Micro-corrosion between mating surfaces. There's almost none. Correct. That shouldn't matter. Isaac nodded. Normally it wouldn't. Then he tapped the chassis lightly. The reading shifted again. Logan inhaled sharply. Intermittent resistance. Exactly. Hunter stared at the display. That tiny variation shuts down the entire vehicle? Not directly. Isaac disconnected the lead. The voltage reference shifts during initialization. Logan finished the thought immediately. The control architecture interprets it as an invalid startup state. Isaac pointed at him. Correct. Silence followed. The younger technician looked absurdly pleased. Hunter looked considerably less pleased. 8 days. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, multiple ECU replacements, international consultations, and the answer sat hidden behind a panel nobody knew existed. Eleanor watched the entire exchange without speaking. Her expression revealed nothing, which generally meant she was paying very close attention. Isaac stood. "You have a grounding strap?" Logan immediately moved toward the parts cabinet. 2 minutes. "One will do." Hunter still stared at the connection. "This can't be real." Isaac smiled slightly. "It usually is." 5 minutes later, Logan returned carrying a temporary grounding lead. Isaac attached one end to the chassis reference point, the other to the secondary junction. Nothing sophisticated, no advanced engineering, just a simple bypass, the kind of thing that would have looked almost ridiculous if the situation weren't so serious. Hunter looked unconvinced. "That's your fix?" "No." "Then what is it?" "This is a test. And if you're wrong," Isaac glanced toward the Bugatti. "Then I'm wrong." The simplicity of the answer irritated Hunter even more. Experts usually defended themselves. Qualified statements, caveats, technical explanations. Isaac simply accepted the possibility and moved on. "Ready?" Logan asked. Isaac nodded. "Go ahead." Logan climbed into the driver's seat. Every person in the service bay stopped what they were doing. Technicians, service advisors, managers, even employees from other departments had quietly gathered nearby after hearing rumors. Eleanor folded her arms. Hunter stared at the vehicle. Isaac checked the time. 24 minutes until school pickup. Logan pressed the start button. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the dashboard illuminated. System checks initiated. Control modules synchronized. Fuel systems primed. The starter engaged. And the 16-cylinder engine came to life instantly. The sound exploded through the service bay. Deep, mechanical, effortless, alive. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The Chiron settled into a flawless idle, as though nothing had ever been wrong. Logan actually laughed out loud. One technician swore. Another simply sat down. Hunter stared at the running engine with the expression of a man watching physics rearrange itself. Eleanor looked from the Bugatti to Isaac, then back again. 8 days. $500,000. International specialists. One grounding strap. Isaac listened to the engine for several seconds, then nodded once. "There it is." Logan climbed out of the driver's seat, grinning. "That's unbelievable." "Not really." "Not really?" Isaac shrugged. "Machines usually tell the truth." Hunter finally found his voice. "How long did you know?" Isaac considered the question. "About 30 seconds after I saw the production code." Silence followed. Absolute silence. Because everyone understood what he was saying, he hadn't solved the problem in 10 minutes. He had recognized it almost immediately. The 10 minutes were simply proof. Eleanor stared at him. "You knew?" Isaac nodded. "Mostly." "Mostly?" "I like leaving room for surprises." Logan laughed again. This time several other people joined him. Hunter did not. For the first time in a very long career, he found himself face to face with someone who understood a machine more deeply than he did. And somehow the most unsettling part wasn't that Isaac had solved the problem. It was that he seemed completely uninterested in the fact that he had. The engine continued idling smoothly for nearly a minute before anyone remembered to do anything. The sound alone felt surreal. 9 days of failure had conditioned everyone to expect disappointment, error messages, dead ends, another theory collapsing under scrutiny. Instead, the Bugatti sat beneath the service bay lights, operating exactly as its designers intended. Stable, responsive, entirely healthy. Logan was the first person to recover, shut it down and restart. One technician immediately nodded. "Good idea." Logan climbed back into the driver's seat and pressed the stop button. The massive engine fell silent. For a brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then he started it again. Instant ignition. Perfect synchronization. No hesitation. No fault messages. Nothing. The Chiron behaved as though the previous 9 days had never happened. A small wave of laughter moved through the service bay. Not because anyone found the situation funny, because relief sometimes sounded like that. Hunter Blake remained silent. He stood beside the vehicle watching diagnostic readings scroll across a monitor. Every system reported normal operation. Every parameter sat precisely where it should. The machine was healthy. It always had been. That realization landed harder than he expected. For nearly a decade, Hunter built a reputation on solving problems other specialists couldn't. Owners flew him across oceans. Manufacturers consulted him during unusual failures. Entire businesses trusted his judgment. Yet a fault he spent 9 days chasing had been identified by a man delivering parts, not through luck, not through guessing, through knowledge. Deep, specific, uncomfortable knowledge. Eleanor noticed the expression immediately. She recognized it because she had worn it herself before. The moment competence collides with someone even more competent. It wasn't humiliation, not exactly. It was perspective. Isaac, meanwhile, checked his watch. Okay. Nobody moved. Okay, Logan repeated. I need to go. The room stared at him. Go where? One technician asked. School. Silence. Isaac clarified. Pickup. Logan actually laughed. You're leaving? Yes. Right now? That's generally how pickup works. Eleanor looked at the clock. You just solved a 9-day failure. Isaac nodded. Looks that way. And you're leaving? My son gets out in 20 minutes. Nobody seemed prepared for that answer. In a room filled with people whose schedules routinely bent around work, the idea that work might bend around family felt almost foreign. Hunter finally stepped forward. Wait. Isaac paused. Yeah? Hunter hesitated. The next sentence clearly cost him something. I'd like to understand how you recognized it. The entire service bay became quiet again, because everyone understood what had just happened. Hunter Blake almost never asked for help. Isaac studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay. Hunter looked mildly surprised. Okay? Sure. That's it? Isaac smiled faintly. You asked. The tension broke immediately. Several technicians laughed. Even Eleanor found herself smiling. Isaac walked toward the whiteboard. The problem wasn't the fault. He picked up a marker. It was the assumption. Hunter folded his arms. Meaning? Isaac drew a simple diagram. You assumed the architecture matched the service documentation, because it should. Usually. Usually? Isaac pointed at the diagram. Production engineering doesn't always optimize for serviceability. Several technicians nodded immediately. Every engineer in the room understood the statement. The grounding revision solved a transient voltage issue during thermal cycling. He added another line. The problem never appeared during validation, so it never entered service literature, Logan said. Correct. Hunter stared at the diagram. And you remembered that after all these years? Isaac shrugged. Some projects stay with you. Why this one? Isaac looked toward the Bugatti. For the first time, something almost nostalgic crossed his face. Because that revision caused 3 months of arguments. Logan laughed. Really? Really? What happened? Half the engineering team wanted to redesign the architecture. And the other half? Wanted a secondary ground point. Who won? Isaac smiled. Depends how you define winning. The room laughed again. Then he checked his watch. School pickup in 13 minutes. I really have to go. Eleanor stepped forward before he could leave. Wait. Isaac paused. Yes? She looked at the Bugatti. Then at him. Then back at the vehicle. How much? Immediate confusion appeared on his face. For what? The repair. I didn't repair it. Eleanor blinked. Excuse me? I diagnosed it. You solved it. Mostly. You fixed a problem nobody else could identify. Isaac nodded. Looks that way. Eleanor folded her arms. How much? Isaac considered the question seriously, then pointed toward the grounding strap. $12. Silence. Again. Logan covered his face. One technician walked away laughing. Hunter looked toward the ceiling. Eleanor stared at him. That isn't what I meant. I know. Then answer the question. Isaac thought about it. You already paid for the part. Isaac. What? I'm serious. So am I. The two looked at each other for several seconds. Finally, Eleanor realized something. He wasn't negotiating. He genuinely didn't care. The realization was strangely disarming. Most people became different around money. Isaac seemed immune to it. At least let us pay for your time. Isaac glanced at the clock. 11 minutes. Fine. Eleanor waited. How much? Whatever a parts delivery pays for an hour. The room erupted. Logan laughed so hard he nearly dropped his tablet. Even Hunter smiled despite himself. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, then shook her head. You are impossible. I've been told that. Frequently? More than once. She laughed. Actually laughed. For perhaps the first time since the Chiron failed, and standing there beside a running $3.9 million hypercar, she realized the most remarkable person in the building wasn't the famous specialist, the wealthy owner, or the engineers gathered around the vehicle. It was the man trying very hard not to be late picking up his son. Isaac arrived at Lincoln Elementary with 3 minutes to spare. That was closer than he preferred. He parked the faded blue pickup beneath a row of bare maple trees and shut off the engine. For a moment he simply sat there, not thinking about the Bugatti, not thinking about Eleanor Chase, not thinking about Hunter Blake or diagnostic architectures or production revisions buried inside decade-old engineering decisions. He was thinking about whether they had enough milk at home and whether his son still needed poster board for a science project due next week. Those were the problems that occupied most of his mental bandwidth these days. The school doors opened. Children spilled onto the sidewalk in noisy waves. A few moments later, Noah Ward appeared carrying a backpack that looked slightly too large for him. 9 years old. Dark hair. Curious eyes. The kind of child who always seemed to be thinking about something. He spotted the truck immediately and smiled. Isaac smiled back. How was school? Noah climbed into the passenger seat. Good. That usually means something happened. We got assigned partners for the robotics competition. Isaac started the truck. And? Noah grinned. I got Emma. Good partner? The best. Isaac nodded. Sounds promising. They drove home discussing robots, science projects, and whether tacos counted as an acceptable dinner for the third time in 1 week. By the time they pulled into the driveway, the Bugatti had already disappeared from Isaac's thoughts. It was just another problem solved. Another day. Another machine. Meanwhile, back in Denver, the Bugatti Chiron Super Sport had become the center of attention. Not because it was running, because of how it started running. Hunter sat alone in a conference room, reviewing every note from the previous 9 days. Not because he doubted Isaac's diagnosis. The evidence was overwhelming. The car worked. The fault was real. The explanation fit perfectly. Yet something bothered him. Not professionally, personally. The problem wasn't that he had missed the fault. Complex systems hid unusual failures all the time. What bothered him was that he never considered the possibility. Logan knocked lightly before entering. You wanted the updated report? Hunter nodded. Thanks. Logan handed over a tablet, then hesitated. You okay? Hunter laughed quietly. Depends. On? Hunter looked toward the service bay through the conference room window. Have you ever spent days solving a problem and then watched somebody else solve it in 5 minutes? Logan smiled. No. Lucky you. The younger technician sat down. For what it's worth, I don't think you missed it. Hunter raised an eyebrow. Really? You were looking at the documentation. And? Logan shrugged. He was looking at the car. Silence followed, because there was truth in that observation. Eleanor spent that evening reviewing Isaac's background report. The second one. The complete one. The first version barely scratched the surface. This one went deeper, much deeper. Bugatti engineering records, technical publications, patent references, internal performance citations, development team acknowledgments. The more she read, the more absurd the situation became. Isaac Ward wasn't merely experienced. He had been one of the most respected calibration engineers in one of the most exclusive automotive engineering environments on the planet. One document described him as a specialist whose intuition routinely outperformed simulation predictions during validation testing. Another referred to him as the final review authority on multiple high-performance production calibrations. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. Good Lord. David looked up from across the office. That bad? That impressive. She handed him the file. David scanned several pages, then stopped. He left all of this? Apparently. Why? Eleanor already knew the answer. The report contained it. Wife's death. career interruption, relocation, reduced workload, school schedules, family priorities. The story was surprisingly simple. David looked genuinely confused. Most people would kill for this career. Eleanor stared at the file. Maybe that's the problem. What do you mean? She looked toward the city skyline beyond her office windows. Most people never stop to ask what they'd be killing for. The following morning, Hunter called Isaac. It took 3 attempts. The first 2 went unanswered because Isaac was replacing brakes on a delivery van. Eventually, the phone rang while he was organizing tools. Hello? Isaac? Yeah, Hunter Blake. Oh. Silence. Is that all? Hunter asked. What else should I say? Fair point. Hunter rubbed his forehead. I wanted to thank you. Okay. And apologize. That got Isaac's attention. For what? Dismissing the idea. Isaac leaned against the workbench. You had reasons. Still. Hunter. Yeah? It's fine. The simplicity of the response somehow made the apology feel more meaningful. After a moment, Hunter laughed quietly. You really don't carry things, do you? Carry what? Ego. Isaac looked genuinely confused. That sounds heavy. Hunter laughed again, for the first time since the Bugatti started. Listen, he said. We're hosting a technical summit in Scottsdale next month. No, you don't even know what I'm offering. I know enough. Guest speaker. No. Paid appearance. No. Travel included. No. Hunter closed his eyes. Everybody said this would happen. What would? That you'd say no before I finished talking. Isaac smiled faintly. Efficient. The call ended a few minutes later. Noah entered the garage shortly afterward carrying a science textbook. Who was that? Work. Car work? Something like that. Noah nodded, then pointed toward a shelf. Can I borrow the multimeter? For? Robotics. Isaac handed it over without hesitation. Bring it back. Eventually. Interesting choice of words. Noah grinned. I learned from you. Later that afternoon, Eleanor drove the Bugatti herself. No meetings. No destination. Just roads. The engine responded flawlessly. Every gear change felt precise. Every system operated exactly as intended. Yet she found herself thinking less about the car and more about the man who fixed it. Specifically, she kept returning to the same question. What kind of person walks away from a career like that and never looks back? By sunset, she still didn't have an answer. 2 weeks passed. For Isaac Ward, they passed the way most weeks did. School drop-offs, parts deliveries, brake jobs, oil changes, science projects, ordinary life. The Bugatti incident gradually moved toward the edges of memory, filed away alongside thousands of other mechanical problems he had solved over the years. For Eleanor Chase, the same 2 weeks felt considerably different. The problem was that she couldn't stop thinking about him, not in a romantic sense, not even in a particularly personal one. What bothered her was philosophical. Isaac represented a contradiction she couldn't neatly organize. Everything she understood about achievement suggested that people spent their lives climbing toward greater opportunities, bigger responsibilities, bigger salaries, bigger influence. Yet Isaac had reached the top of a ladder most engineers never touched and then voluntarily climbed back down. Worse, he seemed completely satisfied with the decision. That made no sense. So naturally, Eleanor decided to investigate further. On a Wednesday morning, she drove to Lakewood without announcing her visit. David called it curiosity. Eleanor called it due diligence. Neither believed the other. She found Thorne Auto Supply first, then the distribution warehouse where Isaac handled regional deliveries. The facility looked exactly how she expected. Functional, unremarkable, efficient. What she didn't expect was what happened when she asked about him. Isaac? The warehouse supervisor said. Great guy. That's not really what I meant. Then you're asking the wrong question. Eleanor frowned. How so? The supervisor leaned back in his chair. Everybody who asks about Isaac wants to know what he used to be. And? Nobody asks what he is. That answer followed her all afternoon. By coincidence, or perhaps because she was no longer entirely honest about her reasons for visiting Lakewood, she arrived at Isaac's garage shortly before closing time. Noah sat at a workbench assembling part of a robotics project. Isaac was helping him solder a connection. Neither noticed her immediately. "Too much heat," Isaac said. "You'll damage the trace." Noah adjusted the soldering iron. "Like that?" "Better. How do you know?" Isaac smiled. "Experience. You always say that, because it's usually true." Eleanor remained near the doorway watching. Something about the scene felt strangely familiar despite being entirely foreign to her life. She grew up around boardrooms, investors, and performance reviews. Not workshops, not science projects, not fathers teaching patience through tiny acts of problem-solving. Noah noticed her first. "Dad." Isaac looked up. "Oh." Eleanor smiled slightly. "Oh? Didn't expect to see you. Most people don't." "Fair point." Noah set down the soldering iron. "You're the Bugatti lady." Eleanor laughed. "Apparently. The car still works?" "Perfectly." Noah nodded. "Good." Then he returned to the robotics project as though the matter had been permanently resolved. Eleanor looked at Isaac. "He's remarkably confident." "Usually." "Usually. Depends on the robot." For the next hour she stayed, not because she had a reason, because leaving felt unnecessary. Customers stopped by. Deliveries arrived. Conversations happened. Ordinary life unfolded. At one point, an elderly customer brought homemade pie. At another, a local teacher stopped in simply to ask Isaac's opinion about a used car purchase. Nobody seemed intimidated by him. Nobody treated him like a former engineering legend. They just trusted him. Around sunset, Eleanor finally asked the question she had been carrying for weeks. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac looked up from organizing tools. "What?" "Leaving Bugatti." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Thoughtful. "No." "Never?" "Not really." Eleanor studied him carefully. "How?" Isaac considered the question. "How what?" "How do you walk away from something most people spend their entire lives chasing?" He looked toward Noah. The boy was explaining robot strategy to a golden retriever that clearly had no interest in engineering competitions. "Because I wasn't chasing it anymore." Eleanor waited. Isaac continued. "People assume success works like a finish line. Doesn't it?" He shook his head. "No. Then what is it?" Isaac leaned against the workbench. "A trade." Eleanor frowned. "Explain." "Everything valuable costs something." "Okay. The question isn't what you gain." He nodded toward Noah. "It's what you're willing to lose." The garage became very quiet. Even Noah looked up briefly before returning to the robot. Eleanor thought about board meetings, quarterly reports, expansion plans, endless schedules. The years spent pursuing growth because growth always seemed like the obvious answer. "And you weren't willing to lose this?" Isaac smiled. "Correct." For a moment neither spoke. Then Noah walked over carrying the robot. "Want to see something cool?" Eleanor looked down. "Sure." The robot immediately drove itself off the edge of the workbench and crashed into a toolbox. Silence. Noah stared at it. "Well," Isaac nodded. "Needs work." Eleanor laughed harder than she had in months. Real laughter. Unplanned. Completely genuine. Noah looked pleased anyway. "The next version will be better." Isaac nodded. That's usually how engineering works. As the sun disappeared beyond the trees, Eleanor realized something important. For years, she had assumed people like Isaac were making sacrifices, giving things up, settling, compromising. Now she wasn't so sure. Because standing inside that small garage, watching a father and son laugh over a failed robot, she found herself wondering whether perhaps everyone else was the one making sacrifices, and whether they had simply become so common that nobody noticed anymore. Eleanor Chase stopped scheduling meetings on Thursday afternoons. Nobody noticed immediately. At a company her size, executives adjusted calendars constantly. Appointments moved. Priorities shifted. Entire weeks rearranged themselves around acquisitions, negotiations, and market conditions. Yet over time, David noticed a pattern. Every Thursday after 3 o'clock, Eleanor mysteriously became unavailable. Not officially, not publicly, but consistently. He finally decided to ask. "Lakewood?" he said while reviewing her schedule. Eleanor didn't look up. "Probably." "Thought so." "You disapprove?" David smiled. "I'm not suicidal." "Fair answer." By now, The trips had become routine, not frequent enough to seem intentional, frequent enough to be obvious. Eleanor always found a reason. Sometimes she brought coffee. Sometimes she claimed to be checking on the Bugatti. Once she arrived carrying a box of specialized robotics components after overhearing Noah complain that certain sensors were too expensive. The explanations varied. The destination never did. On one particular Thursday, she arrived to find the garage unusually crowded. Noah's robotics competition was 2 days away. Half the workshop had been converted into what appeared to be a temporary engineering laboratory. Circuit boards covered the workbench. Wires stretched across every available surface. 2 laptops displayed diagnostic information. The golden retriever sat in the middle of everything, looking deeply concerned about none of it. "This seems organized," Eleanor observed. Noah looked up. "It's not." "Good. Why?" "Because organized engineering projects are usually lying." Isaac laughed quietly from across the room. "She's not wrong." Noah pointed at a small autonomous vehicle sitting on the bench. Version 6. Eleanor studied it. What happened to versions 1 through 5? Learning opportunities. They exploded? One exploded. Isaac corrected him. Technically it smoked. Same thing. Eleanor smiled. Somewhere along the way, these visits had stopped feeling unusual. That realization surprised her. She spent most of her life surrounded by people competing for something. Promotions, contracts, status, influence. Yet every time she visited the garage, nobody seemed interested in competing at all. They were simply busy building things, fixing things, living. Later that afternoon, while Noah tested navigation software outside, Eleanor sat with Isaac near the service bay. The conversation drifted naturally toward work. Eventually, she asked something she had wondered about for months. "Do you know how many people talk about you?" Isaac immediately looked suspicious. "That sounds dangerous." "Probably." "Then no." Eleanor laughed. "Former Bugatti engineers, technical forums, hypercar owners." "Why?" "Because apparently solving impossible problems leaves an impression." Isaac returned a wrench to its place on the wall. "People exaggerate, not according to them, especially according to them." Eleanor shook her head. "You really don't see it, do you?" "See what?" "What you were." Isaac considered the question, then looked around the garage. "I know exactly what I was. And? I just don't think it matters very much anymore." Silence followed, not because Eleanor disagreed, because she was beginning to understand. The distinction mattered. Isaac wasn't pretending his past didn't exist. He simply refused to let it become more important than his present. That was different. Very different. Saturday arrived with clear skies and unusually warm weather. The robotics competition occupied an entire high school gymnasium across town. Folding tables filled the basketball court. Parents filled the bleachers. Students carried machines that ranged from brilliant to alarming. Noah looked simultaneously excited and terrified. "That's normal," Isaac told him. "What is?" "Being nervous. I don't like it. Nobody does." Eleanor attended too. Officially, she claimed curiosity. Unofficially, David stopped asking for explanations weeks ago. The competition lasted nearly 6 hours. Some robots performed flawlessly. Others drove into walls with impressive confidence. One somehow launched itself off a table. Through it all, Noah's machine performed surprisingly well. Not perfectly, but well. It reached the final round before losing to a team whose robot appeared suspiciously smarter than several adults in attendance. Noah looked disappointed for approximately 40 seconds. Then someone handed him a participation certificate and a cookie. Recovery was immediate. "Good event?" Isaac asked while they packed up. Noah nodded. "Version 7 will be better." Eleanor laughed. "You sound exactly like your father." "Good. Why?" Noah looked genuinely confused by the question. "Because he's usually right." Isaac pretended not to hear that. Eleanor noticed anyway. On the drive home, she found herself thinking about the competition. About Noah. About Isaac. About choices. Years earlier, she would have viewed someone like Isaac as a cautionary tale. Exceptional talent stepping away from extraordinary opportunities. Potential left, unrealized. Now the story looked different, because every metric she traditionally used to measure success seemed strangely incomplete when placed beside what she had witnessed over the past several months. That realization followed her all the way back to Denver. And for perhaps the first time in her career, Eleanor Chase began questioning whether growth and success had ever truly been the same thing. 6 months after the Bugatti incident, the story finally reached Molsheim. Not because Isaac told anyone, he never would have. Not because Eleanor publicized it. She had no interest in turning a private lesson into a public spectacle. The story traveled the way most engineering stories eventually do. Through conversations, through forums, through former colleagues, sharing increasingly exaggerated versions of events over coffee and video calls. By the time it reached Bugatti's current engineering leadership, the details varied wildly depending on who told it. In some versions, Isaac diagnosed the fault from a photograph. In others, he identified the problem simply by hearing the owner's description. One particularly ridiculous version suggested he fixed the car while carrying groceries. The truth was less dramatic, which, ironically, made it more impressive. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Isaac received an email from France. The sender's name was immediately familiar. Marc Delacroix, former head of vehicle integration, one of the last executives Isaac worked with before leaving Bugatti. The subject line contained only 4 words: heard a story. Isaac sighed before opening it. Noah looked up from the dining room table. Bad news? Probably not. Good news? Also probably not. Noah nodded. Helpful, thank you. The email itself was short. Mark wanted to talk. Nothing urgent, nothing formal, just a conversation. Isaac ignored it for 3 days. Then Mark called. The conversation lasted almost an hour. They discussed former colleagues, new vehicle programs, mutual friends, retirement plans. Eventually, the Bugatti incident appeared. You know, Mark said, half the company thinks the story is fictional. Isaac laughed softly. That's probably healthy. The other half thinks it sounds exactly like you. Less healthy. Mark laughed. Then his tone shifted slightly. You ever think about coming back? There it was. The question. It always arrived eventually. No. Not even a little? Not really. Silence followed. Mark didn't seem surprised. I thought so. Then why ask? Hope, Isaac smiled. Fair answer. After ending the call, he returned to helping Noah build a solar-powered charging station for the latest robotics project. The transition felt seamless. 1 minute discussing hypercar engineering in France. The next arguing about wire routing with a 10-year-old. Both seemed equally important. Meanwhile, Eleanor Chase found herself facing a problem she couldn't solve with money, strategy, or authority. She was tired. Not physically. Something deeper. For years, she operated under a simple assumption. More effort produced more success. More success produced more satisfaction. The formula worked remarkably well right up until the point it didn't. Her company continued growing. Revenue continued increasing. New opportunities continued appearing. Yet she found herself thinking more often about Thursday afternoons in Lakewood than quarterly earnings reports. That realization was difficult to ignore. One evening, David finally addressed it directly. You know what's happening, right? Eleanor looked up from her desk. That depends. You're reevaluating your life. She stared at him. That's dramatic. Not really. I'm still running the company. Correct. Still making decisions. Correct. Still expanding. Correct. David nodded. And yet somehow the highlight of your month was watching a 10-year-old robot drive into a folding chair. Silence followed. Eleanor hated how accurate that sounded. I don't know what to do with that information. David smiled. Neither do most people. Several weeks later, she drove to Lakewood again. No particular reason. No scheduled visit. Just a free afternoon. When she arrived, she found Isaac sitting outside the garage while Noah tested a redesigned robotics platform in the parking lot. The machine was significantly better than previous versions. It only crashed twice. Progress, Noah announced proudly. Clearly. Eleanor sat beside Isaac on the bench. For a while they simply watched. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the pavement. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. A delivery truck rumbled past. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Eventually, Eleanor spoke. Do you know what bothers me? Isaac looked over. Probably not. Fair. She watched Noah for a moment. I spent 20 years building exactly the life I thought I wanted. Isaac nodded. Okay, and now I'm not sure that's true anymore. Silence followed. Not because he lacked an answer, because he was considering the question carefully. Finally he spoke. That happens. Eleanor laughed softly. That's your advice? It's not advice. Then what is it? Observation. She shook her head. You make everything sound simple. Most things are simple. No, they aren't. Isaac looked toward Noah. The complicated part is usually accepting the answer. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Noah's robot drove directly into a traffic cone. Still working on it, he shouted. Clearly, Isaac replied. Eleanor smiled. Because somehow that felt relevant too. Most people imagined life as a destination, a point where everything finally made sense. Watching Isaac and Noah, she was beginning to suspect it worked differently. Maybe life was less about arriving somewhere and more about paying attention while you traveled. The thought stayed with her long after she drove home, and for the first time in years, she didn't immediately fill the silence with work. The invitation arrived on a rainy Monday morning. Isaac almost deleted it without reading past the subject line. International Automotive Innovation Summit Keynote Invitation. He stared at the email for approximately 3 seconds before closing it. Noah looked up from the breakfast table. What was that? Work thing. Important? Not really. Noah nodded and returned to building a small sensor array from spare robotics components. The matter should have ended there. It didn't. 2 days later, Mark Delacroix called again. Then Hunter Blake called. Then 2 former Bugatti colleagues sent messages. Apparently, declining invitations from prestigious engineering conferences had become a predictable part of Isaac's reputation. You should go, Mark said. No. Thousands of engineers would attend. That's exactly the problem. Isaac. Mark. One speech. No. The conversation ended exactly where everyone knew it would. Yet something about the invitation lingered. Not because Isaac wanted recognition. He didn't. Not because he missed engineering. He still practiced engineering every day, just on a smaller scale. The thought stayed because Noah found the brochure. Wait. Noah stared at the screen. They want you to give a speech? Apparently. To engineers? Probably. Noah looked genuinely impressed. That's kind of cool, Isaac shrugged. Maybe. You should do it. No. Why? Isaac pointed at the calendar hanging on the wall. School. Noah looked confused. School still exists if you leave for 1 day. Fair point. Unfortunately, Noah inherited his mother's ability to identify weaknesses in an argument. The following Thursday, Eleanor visited the garage as usual. By now, the routine felt natural enough that nobody questioned it anymore. She found Isaac replacing wheel bearings while Noah worked on version 9 of his robotics platform. You look thoughtful, she observed. Dangerous assumption. Usually. She handed him a coffee. What's wrong? Isaac hesitated, then surprisingly told her about the invitation. Eleanor listened quietly. And what? Are you going? No. She laughed immediately. Of course. What does that mean? It means I've known you long enough to predict your answers. Noah looked up from the robot. I'm voting yes. Nobody asked. Still yes. Eleanor smiled. I also vote yes. Isaac looked mildly betrayed. This feels coordinated. It's not. That makes it worse. A week later, something unexpected happened. Noah's robotics team qualified for a regional engineering showcase. The event happened to be hosted in the same city, on the same weekend. At the same convention center, Isaac stared at the schedule for several minutes, then stared at it some more. Noah noticed immediately. That's funny. What? Your conference thing. Not my conference thing. Same city. Coincidence. Sure. Isaac narrowed his eyes. You sound like Eleanor. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. Still counts. 3 weeks later, Isaac found himself standing backstage at one of the largest automotive engineering events in North America. He still wasn't entirely sure how it happened. Technically, he had only agreed because Noah's robotics showcase made the trip practical. Technically, he planned to give a short talk and leave. Technically, none of this should have felt significant. Yet standing behind the curtain, listening to thousands of conversations echo through the convention hall, he experienced something unfamiliar: nostalgia. Not for the career, for the people. Engineers discussing impossible problems, designers arguing about tiny details, students excited about technologies that didn't exist yet. The energy felt familiar. Eleanor attended. So did Hunter. Mark flew in from France. Logan Pierce appeared too, now leading his own advanced diagnostics team. Everyone seemed strangely invested in the outcome. "You're all making this weird," Isaac informed them. "Too late," Logan replied. The keynote coordinator approached. 2 minutes. Isaac nodded. Then looked toward Noah. His son sat in the front row holding a robotics competition medal around his neck. "Good luck," Noah said. Isaac smiled. "Thanks." Then he walked onto the stage. The applause surprised him. Not because it existed, because it lasted so long. Thousands of engineers, students, researchers, executives, people who knew exactly who he was, or who he had been. Isaac waited patiently for the room to settle. Then he stepped to the podium. The audience expected technical brilliance, revolutionary insights, deep engineering wisdom. Instead, Isaac looked out across the room and said, "Most people think this is a story about a Bugatti." Silence followed. Immediate. Complete. "It isn't," he smiled faintly. "The Bugatti was easy." Laughter moved through the crowd. Hunter covered his face. Eleanor smiled knowingly. Isaac continued. "The difficult part wasn't diagnosing the car." He looked toward Noah. "The difficult part was learning that success and importance aren't always the same thing." The room remained completely silent. "For a long time, I believed the most valuable thing I could offer the world was engineering expertise." He paused. "Then life gave me a different job." Noah smiled. Isaac smiled back. "Turns out, raising a son is significantly harder than calibrating a 16-cylinder engine." The audience laughed again, then grew quiet. "Engineering taught me how machines work." Isaac looked around the room. "Parenthood taught me why." No slides followed, no technical diagrams, no revolutionary theories. Just stories, about priorities, about choices, about defining success for yourself instead of accepting someone else's definition. 40 minutes later, the audience stood before he finished speaking. A standing ovation, thousands of people applauding, many because of his engineering accomplishments, others because they recognized something deeper, the courage required to choose a different path when everyone expects the obvious one. Afterward, reporters requested interviews. Executives offered consulting contracts. Universities proposed partnerships. Isaac politely declined most of them. As expected, that evening, he sat outside the convention center beside Noah, watching the sunset over the city skyline. The robotics medal hung around Noah's neck. The keynote badge rested in Isaac's pocket. "So," Noah said, "that went pretty well. Seems okay." "Only okay?" Isaac smiled. "Pretty good." Noah nodded. "Good." For a moment they sat quietly. Then Noah asked the question, "Do you ever wish you stayed?" Isaac looked toward the fading sunlight, then toward his son, then toward the future neither of them could fully see yet. "No," he said, "not even a little." Noah smiled. "Me neither." The city lights gradually illuminated the skyline. Somewhere behind them, engineers continued discussing ideas that would shape the future. Somewhere ahead, new opportunities undoubtedly waited. Yet in that moment, none of it seemed particularly urgent, because after all the careers, accomplishments, inventions, conferences, and impossible machines, Isaac Ward had discovered something surprisingly simple. The most important thing he ever built wasn't a calibration system. It wasn't a Bugatti. It wasn't a reputation. It was a life he didn't want to trade for any other. And unlike every car he ever worked on, that was one thing he never needed to fix. The end.